we often hear about bad countries in this country, and we often take selective views as to which countries are bad and good, and we should protest. A good example would be Gaza. Russia and the Ukraine would be another. Bad countries who we like to protest about. But you've actually suggested that we've forgotten one. And the reason that you've suggested we've forgotten one is because Auckland University, or at least academic staff at Auckland University, are hosting a particular man by the name of Professor Miguel de la Torre, is it? A Cuban academic specialising in liberation theology. And he's going to be holding a lecture, as I understand it, in the Cloran Chapel at Auckland University. Why have you taken...
Last Friday.
He did that last Friday.
He's done the lecture, yep.
Why did you take umbrage with the fact that he'd been invited to Auckland University?
Okay, so I'll answer that question for sure, but I'll just provide a quick caveat, and that is that I'm not seeking to employ the power of the state to prevent this man from speaking. I don't like, and in that sense, as I've said on Kiwi Blog, I'm trying to differentiate myself from many, many people in the 21st century who seem to try to prevent people that they don't like from speaking at public functions or public events. That's not what I'm saying here. I believe in his right to free speech. But what I am saying is that I think that it was morally wrong to invite him to speak, which is a slightly different thing. There's nuance here. But why did I take umbrage? Well, this man is a Cuban academic, although he moved to the United States fairly early on in his life. He says on his website that he has taken immersion courses to Cuba, where he takes students on tours of Cuba. He has spoken at Cuban universities in his capacity as an academic, and he specializes in a field known as liberation theology, which is essentially communism with a communism with a religious flavor, with religious language. And I take umbrage at all of these things because actually Cuba is a brutal dictatorship where freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, all of these other great Western freedoms are actually unknown, where in 2021 there were mass public protests against the Cuban government by its own people, which were brutally suppressed by the Cuban government. Many people received lengthy sentences of imprisonment for non-violent, peaceful protests. And here is this man who, for contrast, imagine if we had an academic who had been invited to speak at Nazi universities, speaking at Auckland University. There would be an uproar, but people seem to ignore the many crimes of the Cuban government, both in the modern day and historically. I mean, Fidel Castro's regime following the revolution in 1959 resulted in the murder of thousands of people and the imprisonment of thousands more. There was the mass arrest of LGBTQI people who were sent to concentration camps. None of this, and Professor de la Torre, who is a vocal critic of the United States, which is Cuba's great opponent, has not criticized any of this. And I think that it's inconsistent and hypocritical of him to be touring the world, giving lectures on the many failings of the United States, when the United States, for all of its many problems, does have freedom of speech, does have an elected government, and where far less serious human rights abuses are committed.
So let me get this right. Professor de la Torre, resident in the United States of America, is essentially, in your view, a communist. Embraces.
He self-identifies as a communist.
it embraces communist ideology, would seem to be an apologist for the Cuban totalitarian or communist regime, and the Castro entities in particular. So he's definitely a fellow traveller over there. He gets invited to New Zealand by an Auckland academic to give a lecture on liberation theology, which was very popular in Latin America, as I remember, during the 1970s. You're saying that there is a moral absolute that Auckland University have to deny him a platform?
I'm saying that it's morally wrong, but that he should be legally permitted to, that there should be no legal obstruction to him doing so.
Can I ask you, I want to flip it. Let's make him, who's an apologist? Not Goebbels, that's too. Someone like Stressler, somebody who wrote some of the propaganda for the Nazi Party and the lead up to the Second World War. Would it be similarly, do you think Auckland University would take a similar view if someone like that was invited? Or do you think it's because this person comes from such an extreme regime or was an apologist for such an extreme regime on the left that he's given a free pass?
Well, I can't speak to their inconsistencies. I think that the misdeeds of the Cuban government aren't as well known, but I also think that there are certain people in this country who don't want the atrocities of the Cuban regime to be well known. And one of them is the academic Michael Mawson, who invited Professor De La Torre to Auckland University, who, when I pointed out on his Facebook page when he made a post about this academic visiting, and I pointed out the problems with Cuba, that it's a brutal dictatorship, and that liberation theology was invented by the KGB during the Cold War as a device of ideological warfare against the West, and that the KGB were Joseph Stalin's secret police, that Joseph Stalin murdered 20 million people. When I pointed out all of this, rather than engaging with me, Michael Mawson blocked me on Facebook. Now, of course, that's his right. I'm not saying in any way that that's a violation of free speech. But what I am saying is that it goes to show that he doesn't want people to know about the issues with the Cuban government. And I would very much like to know why that is.
Okay. All right. But can I just go back to the morally wrong concept here?
Sure.
It's fair enough that you think that inviting Professor De La Torre to Auckland University was wrong, and that you believe that those who have invited him have not told necessarily the full truth about his past or his particular views and what they have implications for. But I'm presuming that you could have gone to that particular lecture yourself, Lucy, and posed exactly the issues that you're raising with me now?
As it so happened, I had another engagement at the exact time that lecture was going ahead, or I might have attended.
All right. Well, given that, do you think, though, that free speech should be constrained in any way by morality? Because morality seems to be, it depends which side of the mountain you're sitting or standing, doesn't it? We all have a different moral view.
I completely disagree. I mean, I actually did a major in philosophy at Auckland University when I did my BA LLB, and I deeply believe that there is such thing as objective morality. I don't think that the idea that there is no such thing as objective morality is at all universally held within the academy or by people who've studied ethics or philosophy. There is simply no consensus on that.
But I'm not suggesting there is a consensus. I'm just saying that the problem with it would seem that you're going to have different moral views expressed, I guess, particularly on matters of politics and certainly geopolitics at Auckland University. The idea that it would have to go through some sort of moral lens before somebody is invited onto is problematic, isn't it?
At all. If you accept that there is such thing as objective morality, then...
But there isn't, is
I
there?
think it is. I absolutely do believe that there is such thing as objective morality. I think that Nazi atrocities were objectively morally wrong, and I think that Cuban atrocities are objectively morally wrong.